Good morning, everybody. I hope this day has found you well. In today's episode, we will be exploring a century-old Canadian mystery, a double murder of Montreal's most elite, and why, with as much power as they held, did one family never find answers. This is the story of the Redpath Mansion murders. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from multiple Medium articles, jhmoncrief.com, jasonrobertsonline.com, CBS News, and the rest I will list down below. Many years ago, Montreal's Square Mile, which is now referred to as the Golden Square Mile, housed many of the city's wealthiest residents, including the Redpath family. According to Heritage Montreal, just to give you a little bit of background here, between 1840 and 1930, this square mile was in a time of great prosperity, specifically for the already wealthy. Quote, "This commercial aristocracy controlled the country's destiny and 2/3 of its wealth, just in a small little area." To paint you a picture, these folks engaged in actual dress-up fox hunting before having magnificent 7-course dinners with their extended family and friends of the same status. And the Redpath family here had a prominent foothold in this Golden Square, but their history predates even that. According to CanadianMysteries.ca, quote, John Redpath, the family patriarch, immigrated to Montreal in 1816. English-speaking and a Protestant, he also worked on construction projects with a French-speaking Catholic society. He secured major contracts to construct the Lachine and Rideau canals and Montreal's Notre Dame Church. In 1836, flush with success, Redpath purchased 235 acres of land on the slopes of Mount Royal and renamed it Terrence Bank. Ever aware to new business opportunities, Mr. Redpath here used profits derived from this real estate venture to establish Canada's first ever sugar refinery. On the home front, Redpath fathered 17 children. 17. In 1818, he married Janet McPhee, and from this union, 7 children were born. Sadly, McPhee died of cholera in 1834, and a year later, a 39-year-old Redpath wedded 19-year-old Jane Drummond, who bore 10 children. The Redpath family themselves married into more wealthy and influential families and created endless connections within Montreal and beyond. One son, named John James Redpath, married a 25-year-old Ada Marie Mills. One Medium article reports that, quote, Ada had a total of 5 children with John J. Redpath: Amy, Peter Whiteford, John Reginald, Harold, and Jocelyn Clifford. Ada and her husband surrounded the Redpath children with all of the luxuries that money could provide, often taking them on trips to Europe from a young age. 4 years after their wedding, Ada purchased a villa on Sherbrooke Street for their growing family, which is the cover art for the episode, just for your reference. And the Redpath children were raised here in this 4-story mansion on the corner of Redpath Street, Sherbrooke and Redpath Streets. A circular driveway led up to this opulent home, which featured an ornamental entryway with classic stone columns, vines that climbed the limestone building, and mature trees with a manicured lawn surrounded by beautiful structures. This specific Redpath mansion was set among dozens of other houses owned by branches of the Redpath family on a massive plot. Years passed, and by 1901, Ada Marie Mills, was alone in this Redpath mansion with only her daughter Amy and her son Clifford. Though the Redpaths were never truly alone. With Ada's health deteriorating and extensive grounds to tend to, the family had hired 3 staff members. End quote. And although many of her offspring had left to create their own stories or build their own houses, a few feet away, Ada's youngest would stick around to help care for his mother. Jocelyn Clifford, or Clifford as he was often called, or probably preferred to be called back then, since people are brutal, tried to help his mother as best he could in between his studies and excursions. However, in June of 1901, another son of Ada's was returning home. That would be the eldest son, Peter Whiteford Redpath. These names are awesome but tongue twisters. Peter Whiteford Redpath, who had attended McGill University where he studied sciences and was known to take extended, lavish trips to Europe where he would receive additional medical treatment for sciatica and tuberculosis. Recently, Peter had been away in Colorado for even more medical treatments, but in early June of 1901, he returned home. Despite her illnesses, Ada remained a prominent and active member of Montreal's high society, and I assume she did this to keep up any appearances that she or her family longed for, even planning dinner parties in her own elegant Sherbrooke home, leaving herself no respite to the outside world. On June 13th of 1901, Ada had sent out invitations for a dinner party that she would tragically never attend. According to jhmoncrief.com, quote, at 6 p.m. on June 13th of 1901, John and Ada's eldest son, Peter, who was 31, heard gunshots coming from his mother's bedroom. Rushing in to help, he found a grisly scene. His younger brother, Clifford, who was 25, and their mother, Ada, both lying on the floor, mortally wounded, end quote. And unlike almost every other story I've told, what happens next is bizarre. The police were never called. The family instead had the coroner open and close this case in under 2 days. And less than 48 hours after those shots were fired, Clifford and Ada were buried. Even weirder, the family would never publicly talk about what may or may not have happened that night. The only facts of that night was that people heard 2 gunshots and people found 2 people dead. Many theories and rumors have surfaced in the 120 plus years since, but only a few, in my opinion, hold any value. So, many sources claim that at the time of this incident, Clifford had been suffering from mental illness and possibly epilepsy. His family made mentions of Clifford being extremely stressed out over his studies and or depressed like many believed his mother Ada to be. People close to the family believe that in a fit of epilepsy or depression or rage, Clifford shot his mother before turning the weapon on himself. However, not everyone seems to agree. Other contenders have put forth the idea that it was Ada who killed Clifford before then taking her own life. But either theory depends on one person snapping and killing the other before themselves. But what if that's too easy? What if Clifford and his mother weren't alone in that room? The truth of the murders depends on whether the surviving family, the family that was there, was telling the truth about that night. So, as it turns out, Clifford was essentially the manager of the family's finances since Mom was unwell. Albeit the youngest child, he was in charge. And it's not hard to imagine that Peter or any of his other siblings felt jealous of this, that their mother would trust Clifford over every other child who is older. On top of this, quote, Amy Redpath, the eldest child and only daughter, raised some eyebrows by being very controlling at the scene of the crime, end quote. So, I mean, that could be just a grieving daughter, but as the 2 main witnesses, Peter and Amy Redpath here, and essentially the only sources of what happened that night, Amy and Peter had every opportunity to control the narrative and shape the story of that dreadful evening. This is my theory. Peter and Amy Redpath conspired to rid their mother and the manager of her finances, who just happened to be their youngest brother, in order to gain control of the family's fortune. To me, this explains the secrecy surrounding the deaths. It explains never calling the authorities, It explains why the two deceased were buried in under 48 hours, and it explains why the family never publicly acknowledged this incident. It explains a lot. Is my theory a reach? Maybe. But money is always a motive, and sometimes it doesn't matter who stands in the way, even if it is 25-year-old Jocelyn Clifford. And now, 120 plus years later, we still unfortunately have no definitive answers, but questions are still occasionally asked. The Redpath Mansion murder mystery has not been given up on just yet. And there is so much more to this case that stems even more theories that I just can't get into at this juncture. A lot of it's speculation and rumor. I wanted to stick with at least most of the facts for this episode. Like, for example, some people think that the family doctor was involved, or it doesn't matter. But I highly recommend reading much more into this mystery if you like murky, conspiratorial stories like that. You will not be bored. And that, my friends, is the mystery of the Redpath Mansion murders. What do you all think happened? Was it as simple as a murder-suicide, or is there more to this than meets the eye? Thank you all for listening in today. It's truly appreciated. And if you're itching for some more true crime, I invite you to stick around after the music. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Alrighty. If this isn't the most bittersweet story I've told in a long time. But first, I got hernia. I got hernia surgery finally, and I'm still a little bit sore, a little bit achy in my private parts, but I feel like I'm so close to being myself again, and I cannot wait. I've never wanted to go for a run so badly. Anywho, this is titled New York Officers in the Beating of Robert Brooks Sr. Indicted for Murder by Renee Anderson of CBS News. Officers involved in the beating death of Robert Brooks at Marcy Correctional Facility in upstate New York have been indicted by a grand jury. The officers are charged with second-degree murder and other charges including manslaughter, gang assault, and tampering with evidence. Governor Kathy Hochul said in a statement released earlier the officers were being arrested on murder charges. Quote, Robert Brooks should be alive today. The brutal attack on Mr. Brooks was sickening, and I immediately moved to terminate the employment of those involved. Now, the perpetrators have been rightfully charged with murder, and state police are making the arrests, the governor wrote. County District Attorney William Fitzpatrick took over the case as special prosecutor after State Attorney General Letitia James recused herself over a potential conflict of interest. 4 of the officers under investigation were being represented by lawyers in her office in previous brutality lawsuits. Body camera video released last month showed multiple corrections officers at Marcy Correctional Facility in Onondaga County punching Brooks while he was handcuffed to a medical table. The officers were seen hitting Brooks in the chest with a shoe and lifting him up by his neck and then dropping him. The 43-year-old would die the next day. The county medical examiner's office ruled his death was a homicide caused by compression of the neck and multiple blunt trauma injuries. His son, Robert Brooks Jr., told CBS, I want them all to get prosecuted. It was murder. There's no other word for it. They murdered my father. They robbed him from me. He doesn't get to come home. Brooks had served 9 years of a 12-year prison sentence for stabbing his son's mother. He was transferred to prison from a nearby facility only hours before the beating. Quote, he did the crime and he was doing the time. He was coming home reformed. That's what prison is for, and that's not what my father got. He got a death sentence, Brooks Jr. said. The family filed a civil rights lawsuit alleging the prison used excessive force in a system that tolerates violence. Outcry over Brooks's beating prompted Governor Hochul to visit the correctional facility which is located about 200 miles northeast of New York City, between Rome and Utica. The governor named a new superintendent to run the prison and vowed to expedite $400 million for new cameras at the facility. She also ordered the state to initiate firing proceedings for more than a dozen employees. Quote, "Today, as I stood in the room where Robert Brooks was killed, I was once again heartbroken by this unnecessary loss of life and further sickened to think of the actions of depraved individuals with no regard for human life," the governor said in a statement. Mr. Brooks and his family did not deserve this. So far, 15 nurses and 2 officers have been suspended without pay, pending the investigation, and at least 1 officer quit. Even before the Brooks case, employees at this medium security prison had been accused of abuse. A watchdog group reported, quote, "rampant abuse by staff" after interviewing people incarcerated there in October of 2022. The Correctional Association of New York said it was told of physical assaults in locations without cameras, such as between the gates, in vans, and in showers. A guard once told a new arrival that this was, quote, "a hands-on facility, where we're going to put hands on you if we don't like what you're doing," the report said, end quote. And that is the updated information regarding the brutal and unnecessary murder of Robert Brooks. Just goes to show that our justice system is always been flawed, and it still is, and we need less of what I just read. It's terrible. But thank you all once again for sticking around to the end of the episode. I truly appreciate it. I appreciate all of your eardrums. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you folks next week. Okie doke. Bye-bye. Love you.